Hi, I'm attorney Casey Walker. I'm the founder of VA Disability Group. Today, we're going to discuss something that we get a lot of calls on. We're going to call this, will I lose my benefits if? And then we're going to cover the litany of different circumstances that might play a role in you potentially losing your VA benefits. So let's dispel some of the myths and let's dig right into it. Will I lose my VA benefits if I'm a convicted felon? Yes. If you're receiving disability compensation and you've been convicted of a felony and that felony leads to 60 days or more of incarceration, then yes, you will lose your disability compensation. But you won't lose all of it. If you're 20% disabled, they will reduce it to 10%. If you're 10% disabled, they will reduce it in half. But the maximum you can get is 10% if you're receiving disability compensation and you're incarcerated because of a conviction of a felony. What if you're receiving VA pension? So the next question is, will I lose my VA pension if I'm convicted of a felony or a misdemeanor and I'm incarcerated for 60 days or more? Yes, you will. Now you notice I added misdemeanor on there. The VA pension program is less protected. So if you're incarcerated for 60 days or more and you're convicted of a felony or a misdemeanor, you will lose your VA pension. Keep in mind, just a little heads up, if you are incarcerated and you're getting ready to get out, make sure you notify the VA, ideally before you're even separated from confinement, that you will be free so that they can reinstate. That's why you don't really lose your benefits. They're going to reinstate it automatically once you notify them. So I say automatically, they still need to be told when you're getting out of confinement. So you don't really lose them, but they're put on pause indefinitely until you're out of the confinement. What if you're a court ordered to be on a work release, like a halfway house? Generally, those will not lead to a reduction in your VA benefits. Those are usually safe. Keep in mind as well, if you are confined and you're convicted of a felony and you're incarcerated for 60 days or more, there is an apportionment program that indigent dependents, like a spouse or children, can apply for. It's a pretty stringent standard, but it's at least incumbent on you to try to apply for it if you think you're eligible. If you are eligible for the apportionment, and by you, I mean your dependents, they would receive the totality of what you would have received, but for the fact that you're incarcerated. So if you're at 70% disability, they'll receive that. But yet again, the apportionment has very stringent means testing. They're going to look at assets of the dependents and income of the dependents. In order to be eligible, if the dependents are going to apply, they need to not have a lot of assets and not really make much of an income. Will I lose my benefits if I'm a fugitive felon? Just yes. Yes, you will. Yes, you will. If you're on the run and you're fleeing from the authorities for a charged crime, they will suspend all your benefits until the felon fugitive status is done. They might reinstate it after that, but they will suspend your benefits if you're a fugitive felon on the run. Will I lose my VA benefits if I move to a foreign country? No. Maybe you want to move to North Korea. Maybe you want to move to Iran. Maybe you want to move to Russia. Maybe it's a country the United States doesn't even like. I don't even want to use that term, but that we don't have a great alliance with. No, you won't. You have the freedom to move to a foreign country. Now, the banking might get tricky because the VA might not deposit your monies into a foreign bank held in Iran or China or North Korea. So you still need to have your financial institution be one that the VA will willingly deposit your funds into for disability compensation or pension or whatever it might be. But you are free to live overseas. Keep in mind the healthcare system. You won't have the VA healthcare system overseas. There is an overseas VA healthcare program that you could apply for and avail yourself to. It's not as robust as the VA healthcare system, but it's something. So there are programs out there for veterans who are living overseas, and your disability compensation will continue. You just need a financial institution that you can access in those foreign countries. Another consideration is if you're overseas and let's say you're living in Italy and you want to buy a house in Italy, you're not using the VA home loan guarantee in Italy. You're not using it in New Zealand. You're not using it in Russia. You're not using it in any other place outside of U.S. territories. So if you want to use it in, say, St. John's or the U.S. Virgin Islands, or you want to use it in Puerto Rico, there you can. But if you're outside of U.S. territories and states, you cannot use the VA home loan guarantee. Will I lose my VA benefits if I smoke doobies? No. The VA, as far as marijuana goes, is actually looking into different programs, and they're doing different pilot programs to test the efficacy of treatment of marijuana on different medical conditions, to include cancers and mental health. If you're doing drugs and you are still eligible, quite the opposite. Most of the times, this drug abuse, I don't want to say marijuana can be abused, but I think it can. I think a lot of drugs can be abused. Oftentimes, these are attributable to mental health conditions that are already service-connected with the VA. And it might actually be incumbent on you, if you're not getting a good evaluation for the mental health, to seek an increase for the mental health condition and tell the VA that you have substance abuse issues that are directly attributable to that mental health condition. I wouldn't do this unless you don't have that good of an evaluation for mental health, because you don't want to bring scrutiny to a good evaluation. But getting those substance abuse service connected can benefit you down the road. For example, if you are abusing cocaine or alcohol or some form of drug that has a detrimental effect on your liver and your kidneys, and then you end up developing chronic kidney disease or liver disease down the road, well, at least you can point to your mental health with alcohol abuse that's already service connected, and now you can get a secondary claim for the liver, kidney, or whatever the other systemic conditions are. That's your little special tip. Will I lose my VA benefits if I'm in a nursing home? It depends, but probably not. Keep in mind, the VA actually has a ton of different programs to help fund your nursing home care as well. One other consideration is if you are bordering on incompetency, there might be exceptions. If the VA is funding the nursing home, the VA might actually propose to find you incompetent if you have a severe dementia and you're placed in a nursing home and they're funding everything in your life, especially under the pension program. There are some exceptions, but the general answer is yes, you can maintain your benefits if you're in a nursing home. Next question, will I lose my VA benefits if I remarry? It depends. If it's the veteran remarrying, typically they maintain their benefits because they're the veteran. Now, if their spouse remarries someone else, they might have to remove their spouse as a dependent, so the spouse payment rate would go bye-bye. But veterans typically maintain all of their benefits if they remarry for the most part. Now, let's say it's a dependent surviving, let's say it's a spouse. If the spouse and the veteran get divorced, that spouse will likely lose access to most VA benefits. What if the spouse is a surviving spouse? Let's say the husband is a veteran and they predeceased the wife, and the wife applies for dependency indemnity compensation, commonly referred to as death benefits, and they're receiving their death benefits. Maybe it's $1,500 a month, and that surviving spouse decides to remarry. If that surviving spouse remarries before they turn 55 years old, the DIC benefits go bye-bye. So be warned, if you're going to remarry and you're receiving DIC benefits and you're a surviving spouse of a veteran, if you're close to the age of 55, you might want to wait till you turn 55. And I hate even saying that because it's a detriment and an impediment to marriage. You should be able to marry freely without thinking about the death benefits from the previous spouse you were married to for 30 years. But I'm just the messenger. If you are married and you're availing yourself to DIC benefits and you want to remarry, if you are close to the age of 55, it's probably worth waiting because you will lose your DIC benefits if you remarry before the age of 55. I'm surprised this is allowed. It seems unconstitutional because it's an undue burden to marriage. But that is the law. So be advised, you can lose your DIC if you remarry before you turn 55. Now, one unique caveat to that is if you remarry before the age of 55 while you're receiving DIC, it'll go bye-bye. If you apply after your subsequent spouse predeceases you, if you apply for DIC, it can be reinstated. So will I lose my VA benefits if I get a job? It depends, but probably not. There's some programs that are means tested or require a lack of employment. So let's start with individual unemployability. We have a whole video on individual unemployability, so you can check that out there. To be eligible for VA individual unemployability, you can't work full time. You have to work under what's called the poverty threshold. You can't engage in what's called substantially gainful employment. There are some exceptions there. You don't want to be in the exceptions. You got to prove the exceptions, and they're difficult. But if you go back to work and you're receiving unemployability, 99% of the time, the VA is going to propose to sever your unemployability if you make over the poverty threshold. So you likely will lose your individual unemployability if you go back to work. How about VA pension? If you go back to work, or if you're working and making beyond a certain amount, will you lose your VA pension benefits? It depends, but typically the answer is yes. VA pension is means tested. And if you're working a job and making substantially gainful employment or you're receiving an income, usually you're not even eligible for that VA pension program anymore because of the stringent criteria to even apply for VA pension. And here's one we don't get too often. Will I lose my VA benefits if I win the lottery? I wouldn't worry about it if it's a big chunk of money. But to answer your question, probably not. Why? Because winning the lottery isn't active income. Winning the lottery is passive income. It's not earned income. It's a stroke of luck. However, your VA pension, that is means tested by all assets that you have. So your pension would be implicated and would likely go away if you win the lottery. So if you win the lottery, it's usually a good thing, but your VA pension, which is meant for people who are usually on the indigent side, if you lose your VA pension, it's probably still a net positive, so don't get too down on that. Regarding individual unemployability, yet again, because the lottery is passive income, it shouldn't affect your individual unemployability eligibility. So if you win the lottery, your VA disability compensation and your individual unemployability should not be affected. However, your VA pension likely will be affected. Will I lose my VA benefits if I'm deemed to be a terrorist? Probably. And this one's interesting. So there are specific federal laws that address individuals involved in terrorism. While the direct language might not always explicitly name VA benefits, in every clause, the intent and practical effect are to deny government benefits to those designated as terrorists or convicted of related crimes. So one of those pieces of legislation is the U.S. Patriot Act. If you are determined under some authoritative body of the federal government, if you're determined to be a terrorist, you're going to have difficulty receiving your VA benefits. If you're found to be a terrorist under the Foreign Terrorist Organization designation of the federal government, you will not receive your VA disability compensation. So let's talk about a hypothetical here. Maybe there's individuals who are deemed terrorists by the federal government because there was a discovered plot to kidnap a senator or a congressman, and they've been deemed by the federal government to be a terrorist. They've got that label. They are Foreign Terrorist Organization designation. There goes their banking. Because the minute that label slapped, even if the conviction doesn't happen, the minute you're put on that bad boy list, the banks are immediately notified, and there goes the ability to bank. And the banks will notify you with a default letter saying, we are ending our relationship with you because you've been placed on a bad boy list called the terrorist list. Well, now you're not getting your VA payments because you don't have a bank for them to direct deposit it into. So we talked about the Patriot Act. And specifically, if we go to section 427 of that act, I quote, no benefits to terrorists or family members of terrorists shall be given. So it's not just U.S. citizens or veterans. This is just a sweeping prohibition that no benefits to terrorists or family members. So think about this. If you're a dependent child and you're eligible for educational benefits, or you're a surviving spouse and your veteran husband who dies of a terrorist act, all those ancillary benefits that go to the dependents, the spouses, they all go bye-bye according to this act. If the veteran is deemed to be guilty of a terrorist attack, kind of kiss all these things goodbye. There's a certain designation. It's called the Foreign Terrorist Organization designation. And it's once you're found guilty of a charge of terrorism, then you're designated as such. And as mentioned, the banks there's a list, there's a database. And the banks, if you want to be federally backed, the FDIC, that caveat means you're federally backed. And you got to play by the federal rules. So these lending institutions will put you on a bad boy list immediately. It's automated. The minute you're put on a list by your social security number, it's going to backtrack you to the VA, and the VA will likely be notified, and the banks will likely be notified that you're on this bad boy list. End all benefits. Do not compensate. Do not pay this person. Well, there you have it. We covered a bunch of topics on potential ways that you could or may not lose your VA benefits. So there's a lot of hypotheticals in there and a lot of if-thans, but hopefully you got some benefit out of this. If you did, like and subscribe to the channel. And thanks for watching. And don't be a terrorist.